Hi, everybody. So I wanted to make a video to walk you through our last week and putting together our last paper. So here is the paper module. But before I start talking about that, I just wanted to remind you all that the organ paper is still open, right? It says due November 19th, which it was, but it's still open. And so is the PED, Performance Enhancing Drugs paper. Those are both open, and you can choose one of them to rewrite based or fix based on the feedback I gave you. One, not both. And also, I'm not going to be grading those until the end of class because I've got a lot of other stuff to be doing to help you along with this final paper. So keep that in mind. Once again, the organ paper and the PED paper are open until the very last day of class, which for us is going to be December 17th. I mean, technically, the class is supposed to end on the 16th, but we'll just stay consistent. That's a Saturday. We'll just stay consistent with our Sunday deadline. So you really have an extra day technically. But only, you can only do one of those redos, and they won't be graded until after class closes. Okay, so I said that twice, and now you should get it. Now, back to our final paper that incorporates research. So let's look at the detailed outline here. And we'll go through this together. So the minimum word count is 1,400 and the maximum is 1,600. So for the intro, you're going to give us 3 or 4 sentences about the issue of physician-assisted death in general. Then tell us that Marcia Angell, who's a physician and former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, argues in favor of legalized physician-assisted death. And then you can say hereafter referred to as PAD. In her paper, The Supreme Court and the Physician-Assisted Suicide, the Ultimate Right. Excuse me. Then you want to say, although Angell's argument may have been considered strong at its time of publication, which is 1997, and prior to the enactment of the first death with dignity law in the country in Oregon, today it might be considered weak because it lacks sufficient grounds to support the conclusion, grounds that are available today as a result of 20 plus years of experience with the law in this country. Then you bust out your thesis statement. In this paper, I will supply some extra grounds to her argument, thereby making the argument strong. This means adding 2 extra premises to her original argument, thereby making the argument strong. Then you supply your map of the paper, which is here. I just gave that to you. Next section is your exposition section, where you're going to briefly summarize Angell's argument and be careful to mention, do mention that she uses a strategy of covering 8 common objections to PAD and answering them. That's part of her argumentative strategy. 1 or 2 of these can be discussed here, but no more. And then pay attention to this. That's why I underlined it. If you were successful with your summary of this article from the first module on this issue, you can use that here. And I linked you to that assignment, right? Where you did the annotated bibliography page for Angell's argument. So if you were successful, if you got a comment from me saying this is good, it's ready to go, you can use that here. Then this argument favors the bioethical principle of respect for persons. That's what I put in here because she says it outright. I don't think that this is really in dispute. She says this point blank. It's actually the first premise of her argument, that respect for persons' autonomy is the most critical bioethical principle, even when it conflicts with others. So explain this and illustrate how. I mean, I just gave you the reason that you can make this claim, right? But then, which is the least emphasized bioethical principle? Briefly explain why and illustrate how. We're accustomed to doing this, the usual stuff. Then evaluation section. I will now present Angel's argument in standardized form. Present the argument, and here it is. You know, list form, single space, and indented, like I've reminded you all along. Put this in there. Then explain why this argument may have been considered strong for its time, but not any longer because it lacks sufficient grounds. That's because let me make this clear in other language. She wrote this before we had even enacted the Death with Dignity law in Oregon. So this was before physician assisted death was legal anywhere in this country. She was arguing that we have to go forward with this. It was caught up in the Supreme Court at the time. So she got on red alert and wrote this argument please, we have to let this go through. It's got to be legal, and here's why. Well, then it became legal in Oregon, then it became legal in Washington, and then slowly other states, as you all know, started adopting the same template for legalized physician assisted death. And now we're up to 12 or 13 different states in the country. And throughout that time, we've kept data and information on this process in all of those states. And so those articles that I linked you to, that I provided you with, are just more recent articles that use some of that in data that we can incorporate into her original argument, right? And strengthen it. Section 4. So then you're going to explain that by gathering up some information about how death with dignity laws have actually functioned in this country over the past 20 plus years, we're in a position to contribute to the grounds of Angel's original argument. And so that is where you want to summarize. You want to use those summaries from last week, those annotated bibliographies from additional sources that I've graded several of yours already, and today's Monday, I'm gonna be grading them as quickly as possible. If you were successful with those, use those summaries here. Just make sure that you add some transitional statements so that the reader knows what you're doing. Okay, so you're gonna say, look, now that we've had some experience with this law and in all of these states, we can contribute to Angel's argument and strengthen it by providing additional grounds in the form of 2 additional premises. Then you're going to throw in one of your summaries from last week, then another one. Make sure everything flows properly so that you're marking for the reader what exactly you're doing. And then you'll say, we're now in a position to present a new standardized version of Angel's argument that incorporates 2 new premises based upon the information we just delivered here. So you'll use her original premise, her second original premise, one from the new research you just described up here, another from the other piece of research you just described up here, then her premise, the usual arguments against physician-assisted death, then physician-assisted death ought to be legal. Then you want to explain that this new version with its increased grounds can be considered logically strong. Then you want to also say, discussing cogency is beyond the scope of this paper. We're not getting into cogency here for this paper. We're just increasing the strength of an argument that is kind of old. In your conclusion, wrap up your paper by re-articulating what you've done. And then consider a possible objection to your new and improved argument and answer it. Some may claim that this new premise that I added to Angel's argument is this, that, or the other, blah, 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 blah. To them, I would argue back that ding, 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 dang, dang, dang. Okay. Then keep in mind that your paper, as usual, will be graded for clarity and style and mechanics. You also need to use citations in this paper. So you can use MLA if that's what you learned. I prefer Chicago style with footnotes, but that's not going to affect your grade. If you know MLA, do it. If you want to learn or you know Chicago style, you can do that too. There are links to both of those style guides. But for instance, your first citation ought to come in your introduction when you mention the name of her article. That's where you should have your first parenthetical documentation or your first footnote. Um, Then your next one should come in when you are mentioning the names of the articles that you are using for these two summaries. And I guess I should, let me see. I'll put that in here. I'll remind you in this outline that you need to mention the name and author of your articles. So once you mention the name and author of each article, you want to cite that as well, either parenthetically or with footnotes. So those are the three major citations you need to make. One here, and then one for each of these news sources that you're incorporating. And if you quote the article, any of the articles at all. But if you quote, there should be 3 or 4 times, or you should quote 3 or 4 pieces maximum. Maximum. If this paper is full of quotes, it's not going to be. You'll get docked for that because I really would prefer that you paraphrase rather than quote. So don't do a lot of quoting. As a matter of fact, avoid it. Just avoid it. If you feel like you must, then 3 or 4 sentences maximum. And anytime you do that, you need a citation as well. So if you avoid quoting altogether, you only need to do 3 citations total. Okay. Um, and I think that's it. So I'm here if you need me, especially, try to work on this and read through this assignment and plot it out during the work week. And let me know if there's anything I can help you with. Okay, everybody.